Welcome back, everyone. So excited to be joined today on Accounting Conversations with Dominic Piscopo. He is the founder and owner of Big Four Transparency and a good friend of mine. So excited to have Dom on here. Dom, so excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Chayton. I'm happy you finally done this podcast because ever since we kind of got connected, I was like, oh, this guy, like as a student, you're really kind of making your way through the industry, making those kind of great connections, and I think that's going to serve you super well. So I think podcast was a really good next step for you. So I'm really happy to see it.
Well, I appreciate that. It's been fun. I've gotten to know some great people. And
Yeah.
Dom, you are doing some amazing things in the accounting space and you bring so much value to young accounting professionals. So excited to have you on to talk about all the great things you're doing for the profession. You have your own podcast, which has
Yeah,
been
and
so
brand
fun to
new.
listen to. That's just the Big Four Transparency podcast, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll make sure to drop the link to your show here in the show notes. But why don't you give us a little introduction on your career path to accounting, and then we can dig into the Big Four transparency stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, so I mean, I am a CPA up in Canada. I've been a CPA for, I want to say, like 3.5 years now. And essentially, I kind of started my journey in the big four firms. I was working in tax. And I honestly, like, I think I got dealt the best hand I could have possibly been dealt. Like, I worked on a team where the partner really cared about, really cared about the staff at the office, which is fantastic. Like he was like a very empathetic leader. I got paired with a coach who was just like an absolute superstar, just like led such a fantastic team. And yet like that, public accounting journey still didn't work out for me. So I think it was like a little bit of an indication that like there is a little bit of a need for change kind of in the industry. And there's a lot of people for who like the way things are currently in the status quo in some of the large firms like just maybe doesn't work out. So that was kind of my experience where I had a lot of interest outside of sort of the traditional just billable hours. Like I was loving getting involved in business development, um, just kind of a lot of like the extracurriculars, I guess. And I found that that was like really not recognized very well at the lower levels. And so that kind of led to a lot of frustration. And then the other side of it to me was really compensation. So as a student at university, I was working some relatively high paying jobs before getting into the big four. Uh, where before university, I worked a sales job where I was making pretty good money. And then I was working in bars, I was DJing, where like you can you can make a ton of money. So it was really really frustrating to me when I got my co-op placement at what felt like this really like prestigious firm, and I realized that like you know by Friday night at the bar I was clearing as much money as half of my whole week at this accounting firm where I was working long hours. So compensation was a major sticking point for me. And then that kind of became the origin story of Big Four Transparency, where I kind of realized that the firm I was at, we were being underpaid compared to even kind of the local market. So I'm up in Canada. Salaries are quite a bit lower, especially early on at the big firms. And I had kind of found out that like every other firm in the city was paying their like starting salaries were about 10% higher. So I actually kind of brought this to the partner I had a really good relationship with, and I kind of just expressed some frustration around that. And I was surprised to find out that he had no idea that that was actually the case. Like he didn't actually know that we were not as competitive as some of the other firms were. And he kind of said like, "Hey, listen, like if you can gather up like real information on this, I will try to do the best I can to make this right. So I will kind of like advocate for you guys and just see if we can kind of like match the market." So I did that, and I didn't do it through Big Four Transparency at the time because I hadn't built that yet. But I actually just went around talking to everyone else, and I was like, hey, like, what are you getting paid? Which is harder to do than like now when you have this tool that's more anonymous. But and so I got the data for the partner, and my whole cohort ended up getting like a roughly 10% salary increase, just as an adjustment. So that was kind of my experience there. I didn't build Big Four transparency until about a year after I left. Um, a lot easier to build this kind of tool when you're not actually at the firm anymore. Like, I think that would have been like a little bit of like a weird tension at the time. So I built this just for fun. I was trying to like learn how to use no code tools, and I was just kind of playing around, and it went super viral on Reddit. Um, and so it's kind of become what it is today. And for those who maybe are not familiar with it already, Big Four Transparency is probably the largest crowdsourced salary database in North America for accounting professionals. So there's over 14,000 submissions. It's helped almost 250,000 accounting professionals gain access to high quality salary data. And this was really just kind of done as like a independent project saying like, hey, like this is going to help us all be able to advocate for ourselves a little bit better, go into compensation discussions a little bit more informed. And so I built that, and it became just kind of a huge community project. And the ask is just, you know, if this helps you, please submit your own information to continue making the tool better. But it's like a free open access tool for people to be able to kind of see how much they should be paid.
Yeah, it's an amazing tool, and it's so easy to use. I mean, you hop in, you put your location, your job title, what size firm you're at. So are you at a big four firm? Are you at a more local firm? And then it pulls up all of the entries at that location for your position over the past couple of years. So you can see exactly where your salary is going to be at, which is just so, I mean, for everything that's going on in the accounting industry right now and for people who are trying to land jobs, it's just such a valuable tool. Maybe you could talk a little bit about when you brought that gap in salary up to your partner when you were at the Big Four. How did you get the
Mm-hmm.
courage to do that? And, you know, what kind of a impact did it have on your cohort? I mean, you got them all a 10% raise. Like, that's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was like maybe a little bit naive, like to be realistic with you. Like, I don't know that people should be like running campaigns like this or anything. I have always, often to a fault, honestly, been like very kind of outspoken about how I feel about things. Uh, and at the same time, like, I think that like this partner had good relationships with employees, and like I was able to kind of feel safe bringing this up. And obviously, like I brought it up in a certain way where it wasn't like accusatory, being like, you're robbing us. Like it was really like, hey, like I've noticed this, and you know, I'm really disappointed about it. Um, and so that's kind of how that discussion opened up. And again, to his credit, he kind of like took it in stride and was like, okay, like let's talk about this. Like let's look into it. Um, and yeah, like I think it is maybe a little bit naive. Like some people could kind of get themselves into trouble, but it was one of those situations where honestly, like I was surrounded by good people. And also at the time, like I was just like, wow, this is really crazy. Like I was really upset about it. So I just kind of went ahead and did it. So yeah.
Well, it's great that you had good leadership and good people around that were willing to listen, right? We going forward in the accounting industry, that's what we need. And
Yeah.
kind of going along with that, with the pipeline problem, I personally think that one of the easiest solutions to the pipeline problem isn't even changing the 150-hour rule. It's just higher salaries. I mean, I know
Yeah.
a hard thing for accounting students right now is you do an extra year of school, have to take the CPA exams, and yet your friends who got a 4-year degree in finance and went into consulting are already making more than you are, even though they did less school. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's a model problem, and I've been really outspoken about this. And it's funny. I'm in the middle of writing an article for Going Concern about this, where I'm workshopping the title, but it's something along the lines of like, it's not the 150-hour rule that's the problem. You're just bad at business. It's kind of, we'll see. It's something along those lines where like I think that it is really just way too forgiving to just blame it on that, and everyone's just kind of casting the blame on this scapegoat essentially. But like, hey, like people will do a PhD in history because it's intrinsically rewarding, or people will put themselves through like actual hell for like investment banking jobs because guess what, the money's there.
Yeah.
Or when you look at kind of doctors and stuff like that, like my sister's a doctor. She's been through just insane amounts of schooling to get where she is. And again, like medicine is a bit of a combination where like there can be good financial rewards, but it's also very intrinsically rewarding. I think like when we take an objective view, and you're among that crowd where you're like, I love accounting, and I think that's really good. But
Yeah.
like when we take an objective view, like I don't know that accounting is like the most intrinsically rewarding career where like, yeah, it's cool. Like I actually love working with clients and feeling like I'm making a difference in their business, but it's not like I'm saving lives or like doing some crazy like community service that I like go to bed and I'm like, wow, I can't believe I can bring this value into the world. Right. So
Right.
there needs to be that financial reward for it to make sense. Right. So I think that blaming the 150-hour rule is very convenient, that you can just go and point at this thing and not address like, hey, are we maybe not doing enough to attract these candidates? And the people who need to have these conversations, who are essentially like the partners and very senior leadership at these firms, at the end of the day, like if you change the model, someone at some point in the process is getting the bad side of that deal, right? Because I think what needs to happen is like maybe the salaries, or not even salaries, but just compensation at the partner and above level, maybe need to be revisited a little bit. But like that might help their lifestyle, right? Like maybe if instead of making $500,000 to $1 million each, like people were making marginally less, not a crazy amount less, but marginally less, or some of the kind of partner pensions were like less extravagant, like there would be a little bit more for staff. And in turn, I think that that would make the partners' lives better because they wouldn't have to be putting in these crazy hours. Like on Blake Oliver's podcast, he talked about it. Like partners are like at a lot of places working more than some of the staff is. And that
Yeah.
eventually just becomes a reward that like people don't even want. And that was actually like something in my head when I left. Like I am a very, very financially motivated person. Like you put the right financial reward on the thing, like I'll do it. But like I was looking at it and I was like, yeah, I really want to be able to earn this type of income. But like when I look at a lot of the lives of these people, like it's not necessarily lives I'm super into. And like when you start talking about these salaries, like $400,000 or $500,000 a year, or in some cases, just like even much more than that, I'm like, I would much rather follow a path that might get me to 250 or 300 down the line, but have a good lifestyle. Like once you get to that point, like you're pretty willing to make some level of financial sacrifice to instead have a better lifestyle. So I think that's like a conversation that needs to happen. And I'll put it on the record. I hate the 150-hour rule too. Like I think that that's just unnecessary obstacles, like bureaucracy. I think a lot of it is just squeezing more money out of students and is not really in anyone's benefit. But I just do think that it's being scapegoated a lot. Like I think it's a problem. I don't think it's the problem, for what that's worth. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm someone who loves accounting, like you mentioned, right? I'm excited about my career and my professional journey to
Yeah.
accounting. Um, but I think that is something that has to be addressed if we're going to get future generations to be accountants. Is there has to be a combination of better hours and better pay. Otherwise, other jobs are just going to outpace us. And, accounting is in such a unique and great position to be worked almost fully remote in most
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah.
And the firms that are going to leverage technology and leverage good pay for their workers and good work life balance are going to be the ones that take advantage of all of the impacts of the shortage and there not being enough accounting firms for all of the work that needs to be done. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. And I'll add to
and
that,
I
like,
think,
oh, sorry. I'll
no,
add to
no, go
that,
ahead.
like, I think that, like, yes, where I mentioned, like, maybe one of the things that needs to change is like slightly less profits to partners. But like when you mentioned technology and stuff like that, like, another thing that can change without even touching partner profits or owner profits is just an improvement in like practice management and technology and stuff like that being applied, right? Where like even at the big four firm where I was at, like there was certain processes where I was like, this is an insane use of people's time. Like some of the things I was like, this makes no sense. And so like honestly, just like wasting less of people's times by having better processes and like, because it was such a large firm, it was probably one of the better firms out there. Like a lot of accounting firms just run very inefficiently, where like you can then also like you can do more with less, keep your profits high, and let your staff be paid appropriately and live a decent lifestyle, right? So yeah.
Yeah, it's the future is bright though for accounting because there are people who are making a difference and making changes, and um, that's what's so exciting about Big Four transparency. So, if if I'm an accounting student right now and I want to check out
Hmm.
Big Four transparency, what are some ways I can kind of use that to maybe better my job searching or better um, maybe I want to choose a specific city to live in once I graduate. How can I use Big Four Transparency's database to better my opportunities there?
Yeah, I think there's like a number of ways that it can be useful to students. Like one of the ones is just like getting real answers and expectations of like what's to come. Because again, I think part of like my panic as like an intern or first year analyst was like, oh my God, like, am I just going to be poor forever, basically? Um, Whereas like, it is actually important to know, like, this is like a very like, deferred gratification type field where like, there's huge rewards down the line in public accounting or even outside of public accounting. Like there's like pretty wicked jobs out there and you can do really well, but like you need to understand that in general, if you choose the public accounting path, like early on the compensation is going to be a lot less interesting, but you do have these like outsized returns later on. So first of all, even just knowing and putting like an actual real number to that, I think is like really helpful just mentally so that you don't get like shell shocked if like early on the salary is not what you think it is or something like that. um, Beyond that, in picking a role or even a stream, like I just think more data is better and is going to like improve your decision making, right? Like having known what I know now, like maybe early on I would have done consulting. Maybe like I don't think I would have loved the work, but like at least compensation wise, it might have been better in the early days. Um, but like understanding like there's differences between the consulting field and like the tax and audit fields in terms of compensation. You kind of have to like be able to follow, what some of that path is, and then also just having the proper data to kind of like know what you should be getting paid in reality, so that when you are picking that job, like you're able to advocate for yourself in the sense of like you're not going to take a job that's paying you way below market, right? Like you at that point when you have the data, you can understand what your time and experience is worth, and just make sure that again the roles that you're looking at are reflective of that. So
Yeah, that's awesome, and it's such an amazing resource that young accounting professionals can use. So, kind of going along with that, students right out of the gate don't have a lot of leverage
yeah,
to negotiate a higher salary in the beginning, right? But how could a professional, maybe a couple years, 5 to 10 years into their accounting career, use Big Four transparency to negotiate and get a better salary and a better work life balance?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's really going to depend on the team and like what the leadership is like. Like some people are very stubborn, and some people kind of like understand how business works and like are willing to have conversations. So I get very frequent messages from people saying like, "Hey, like, yeah, I went in my comp review and like I was super fed up with how things were going. I got offered like not a great compensation package." And basically like I came back to them with like the actual data and like some of the findings for my specific city. You also have to be careful about that. But like for my specific city and like cost of living kind of level, and like presented that data back and essentially said like, hey, here are the market rates, and I'm able to tell you that objectively. Like this is not an emotional discussion where I'm just kind of like throwing a fit and saying like, I need more, I need more. Like when you're able to actually like show real data and show like, hey, like I am in fact below market, some people will take that. Obviously there's some leadership that will is just going to be stubborn and just say, well, this is what I'm paying, too bad. And I think in the long run they're just going to really hurt their own business, but in the short run what that means is that they're just not going to take this discussion with you seriously. So that is kind of one of the pitfalls, is like not everyone is willing to hear it. So there's a little bit of an assessment to make there. But ultimately, like if you know what the market rate is for something with high conviction, which was the whole point of this project, um, you can have those discussions and just be mentally willing to move on from this role, right? Like I personally don't want to work for a team or a company or anything like that where they are not willing to address this. If I say, hey, I'm way below market, and they just say, oh, well, that's too bad, like guess what? That's not a place you want to be. So it is kind of important sometimes to step up and have those conversations. But again, just be a little bit careful of like, know who you're dealing with. If it is people who are not receptive, like if you're going to have that conversation, you basically have to be ready to move on and find something else. The good news is, like, once you have a little bit of experience, like, not super hard to find something else. So, like, especially once you kind of build up a network like you're doing, Chayton, I think by the time you graduate, you're going to have a ton of inbound offers from people for great positions. Like because of what I'm doing, and I'm very public too, I get a lot of inbound for roles that are paying way more than what I'm kind of getting paid at my day job currently. Now there's some other factors where like, oh, I like the team, it's a good lifestyle and stuff like that. But like once you have kind of that flow of roles and you have the confidence of like, hey, I can just go find something else if I need to, it really empowers you to have those discussions, right? Like if you need this job to pay for your family and you don't have any prospects of another one, be careful. But like for a lot of people, that's not going to be the case. You can find something else where you will be respected and paid appropriately.
Well, and that's the power of having the numbers, a big transparency talk for you, and that's
Yeah.
the opportunity that is the accounting industry right now, because there's not enough professionals to fill the gaps. If you market
Yeah.
yourself the right way, you network the right way, and you've built up the necessary experience, I mean, you can do about anything you want in the accounting industry right now because of that. So just an
Yeah.
amazing opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And like some of, people like get really scared of like, oh, am I going to be pigeonholed in the type of stream that I pick, right? And like I am like such proof that that's not true. Like I went from a tax role to a controller role to now I'm an FP&A, just because like there's that demand there for the talent, and I wanted to kind of explore this and I wanted to kind of understand more what was out there. And like again, if you're putting yourself out there, if you're meeting people, like that's super powerful, and you're kind of able to, like, the world is your oyster essentially. You're really able to kind of explore and find what works for you.
Yeah, so I wasn't originally going to ask this question, but you mentioned the different career changes you've made.
Yeah.
How were you able to do that, and how does an accounting degree allow you to make all of those jumps. So, like, one of the big arguments I make on my LinkedIn page is that an accounting degree is the best business degree because it gives you the most versatility possible, right? You can go
Yeah.
into consulting, you can do tax or audit like most accountants do. You can go into FP&A, which is really interesting and is really cool that you're doing that. You
Hmm.
can go into advisory roles. I mean, fractional CFO, you can be an actual controller, an actual CFO, all these different things you can do. How were you able to leverage your accounting degree and your public accounting experience to make those jumps?
Hmm. Um, I mean, the first thing is like really getting yourself out there, like trying to, and it's hard for people who are introverted. Like this will not come naturally, but like please do make some degree of efforts where like a big thing for me in university was I did case competitions, and that like opened a ton of doors for me where like you get a bit of a profile from that. It gets a bit of attention. It was like the team that I performed with was like the first team ever like in my province in Canada to like win for tax case competitions because you're competing against like graduate students basically. And like that, like actually like people kind of like hear your name and you can be like, oh yeah, like I'm the guy that did that. What you're doing, building a podcast, or like honestly, just like going to events and just being out there and talking to people, just having conversations with people, honestly, is like a huge way to get out there. In terms of like doing the pivots, like it's just about expressing interest and being willing to learn. So when I was in tax, like I actually really love like the tax planning side of things. Um, and I thought that was super interesting. But I always like we would work with the controllers of these businesses, and I was always like, oh, what's it like to be on the other side? Like I was really curious about that. So I did some independent learning. Again, maybe not for everyone's situation, but I actually had a conversation with the partner that I was like, I don't know if this is working out for me. Like, I'm kind of looking at some other opportunities, to be honest with you. And he actually ended up referring me to like a pretty famous entrepreneur, actually, who was looking for a controller who was going to be very entrepreneurial. And he was like, okay, cool. Like, I think this is a match. Ultimately, like, that role was not for me. But like, just expressing interest in things and being willing to learn. And like I would find people who were controllers at places and have conversations with them, like, what does this job look like? What is just ask questions to understand the industry. And literally just by asking them questions, I had like 30 people who knew that I was interested in this type of work, who like will now think of me anytime that someone in their network is looking for someone for that role, right? And similar for FP&A, like it was literally just the business that I ended up joining, Rewind. They like I had built a relationship with this company for years. Like when I was at the Big Four firm, I was actually like working with their head of finance to try and bring them on as a client. So that was like an old relationship, and just by like being out in the market, they launched a backups for QBO product, which is obviously very accounting heavy. And at the time, I like spoke with one of their like marketing leads to like help them understand the kind of the accounting industry and like the world I was in, so that they could kind of do better at selling into that. And so obviously, like by the time I get to this interview, I'm like, hey, like I've actually like I helped your business out like 2 years ago with this thing. And I've known your director of finance forever. And, obviously you need to develop the technical skills. So I'm also very like I learn a lot by audio. So I started listening to like every FP&A podcast there was out there. Um, Also, interview tip for people. I looked up the CEO and the person who is in charge of like hiring for this role on Spotify. And I found that they both had podcasts there where like the CEO talked about like his philosophy on work. I actually like learned some really cool things about like dealing with the changes from COVID and in the work environment too. But I understood his philosophy on work, what he looks for in an employee. I had the HR manager talk about like what she looks for in an employee, like certain things that like are a huge green flag for her in interviews. So I'm going into this interview and I know exactly what they're looking for, right? So just doing the prep, doing the homework, and then just having yourself out there, like you have those relationships with people. It's again, I obviously had to perform at the interview still, but it was like
Yeah.
I think I was probably 5 steps ahead of anyone else because it was like, oh, this guy's shown an interest in our business for so long already. So yeah.
Knowing your stuff and being well networked within that company, it made all the difference, and I can testify to that too. I just had an interview with a large public firm a couple of weeks ago, and they actually had a couple of podcasts too. And I
Yeah.
made sure to listen to as many episodes as I could before the interview, and being able to like name drop people, or talk about how this episode added value to me, or how I could see the company culture bleeding through the podcast, all of those things. Like,
Yeah.
no other student is going and listening to a big public accounting firm's podcast. Like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Yeah.
can
Putting in
really
that
make a
effort.
difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've even like told people before, like, oh, dude, like I read a bunch of your blog. Like, I love what you have to say about this. Like, and like it takes them off guard. And if I feel like it kind of breaks down that barrier, and now you're just two people having a conversation, it's less of like an actual scary interview.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would really recommend it.
That is such sound advice, and I think even as students we can start applying that now, and be networking and getting to know people and doing your research. You can do that as a student. That's not something you can start learning how to do once you're out in the field. So
Yeah.
kind of
And
wrapping up here. Oh,
for
go
students
ahead, go
doing
ahead.
networking, yeah, for students doing networking, by the way, like a lot of people take it way too seriously and are like, I'm going to show them that I know everything about IFRS. Like, not the place. Like, just like I did a lot of recruiting for the firm where I was at when I was there. Like, I was part of kind of the team that picked who the co op students were going to be. Like, a lot of it was like, who would I love to have around the office and have a beer with? And then you just basically from there, like you trust that the interviewees will make sure that this person is competent. But in terms of the actual networking, like it is just like so much of this stuff is way less stressful once you understand that like this is just getting to know people. And it goes both ways. Like the people doing the recruiting are also like, oh my God, I hope the students like me. Right. Like it is actually just like have these conversations with people and just try to like find a connection. And like, listen, like from one big four to the next, like at the local office, there might actually be some difference and there might be different clients that they serve or whatever. And that's a bit of a difference, but like, it's not going to be that different. Like for me, what made the difference in recruiting was I was like, okay, well, if I go here, like my coach is a superstar and I actually like really get along with everyone that I met. So I'm going to go here. I got like a really bad impression from a couple of recruiters at like a different one of the big four. And like, again, the work probably would have been basically the same, but like you pick based on the people and you as a student are also basically interviewing them. Like, don't kind of forget that is that like you actually have a little bit of leverage here where like they need talent. So like, if that can kind of give you a little bit more confidence in like doing this and just understanding like the networking event is not the interview. You don't need to prove technical skills. Just be a fun person to be around. And if you're introverted, like that's fine. Half of the people you're talking to probably are too. Like talk about what your genuine interests are and like you'll probably find someone who shares some of those interests, right? So, yeah, that's just big advice for kind of like networking to students from me and like I really had fun at my networking events and I had just a mountain of offers as a result of it. Um, so yeah, that's just kind of my 2 cents on some of the networking and just advice for students doing that.
Well, and that's how it should be. Like,
Yeah.
I get students telling me all the time, like, I don't know how you post on LinkedIn all the time. I don't know how you are getting to know these people or doing these interviews. Like, this stuff is fun for me, right?
Yeah.
It's hard in the beginning to open up and open your mouth and be different. But once you get going, like, getting to know people like you, Dom, is the whole reason why this podcast and why networking is so much fun. And so
Thank you.
I love that advice to just get out, be yourself, and don't take it so seriously, because you're just trying to get to know people and see if you would be a good team. Like, technical skills matter, yes, but worst case scenario, they like you so much they're willing to help you get up to speed on the hard skills to be
Yeah.
able to be on your team.
Yeah, especially in junior roles too. Like, listen, I think I spent like for 2 of my first weeks as a co-op, like digitizing old files for like a partner. Like they weren't that worried about like how much technical tax knowledge I had because they're like, listen, this guy's brand new. Like he's working at bars. Like he did, like, sure. Like, yeah, I got a good grade in tax, but like this, it was really like they'll teach you. Honestly, like almost none of what I do these days like has anything to do with what I learned in school, and it's like just you learn from the job and from doing the things. So yeah.
Yep, I love that advice. Well, Dom, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I enjoy every time we get to talk. I am going to link your website to the database Big Four Transparency here in the show notes and your LinkedIn profile. What's the best way if students want to learn more about Big Transparency or want to learn more about you? What's the best place they should find you? Should they find you on LinkedIn? Where should they look for you?
Yeah, like I'm super open. I love to have conversations with people. Like I have a contact page on the website at big4transparency.com. LinkedIn's a really good place, honestly. Like I'm pretty responsive on there. I would say those are probably kind of the two best bets. I'll also add like I have a newsletter that kind of helps digest some of this as well, which sort of just is really aimed at students and is kind of trying to kind of like keep you in the loop of what's going on in the industry. I think without necessarily like being in touch, I feel like that's a good way for me to kind of share what I think will be relevant to you. So that's also just kind of linked on the website. But do feel free to reach out. Absolutely. Like I love to help when I can. So yeah.
Okay. Well, Dom, thank you so much. I've really
Yeah. Thanks for
enjoyed
having me on.
having you on today. Yeah, and looking forward to what the future of Big Four Transparency looks like. So, looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chayton. I really appreciate it. All right.
Yeah, thank you, and
Yeah.
thank you to all my listeners for being here today. And I really hope you found some value. Make sure you go check out Big Four Transparency. So, we'll see you all next week.